The king's herald had ridden 3 days to reach the orc settlement beyond the northern mountains, and when Kendra Lawrenson heard the proclamation that all citizens, human and orc alike, must present themselves at the royal wedding ceremony and kneel before their sovereign, she felt the familiar burn of resentment flare in her chest like wildfire. She stood in the doorway of the modest longhouse she shared with her mother and younger brother, her green fingers gripping the weathered wood so hard that splinters threatened to pierce her skin. The herald sat atop his white stallion, reading from a scroll edged in gold that seemed obscene in its opulence compared to the simple homesteads scattered across this windswept valley. Behind him, 2 guards flanked his position, their hands resting on sword hilts as though they expected the small gathering of orcs to riot at any moment. By decree of King Adrian Hawthorne, all subjects within his realm are commanded to attend the royal wedding and swear fealty upon bended knee, the herald announced, his nasal voice carrying across the settlement. Failure to comply will be considered an act of treason punishable by exile or imprisonment. Kendra's mother, Morna, touched her shoulder gently. "We should go," she whispered. "We cannot afford to draw his attention, not when we have worked so hard to be allowed to stay here." "Kneel," Kendra said, the word tasting like ash. "He wants us to kneel." "It is only ceremony," her mother said, but Kendra could hear the weariness in her voice, the resignation of someone who had bent and bowed too many times in her life already. The herald departed before anyone could voice objection. Not that any would have dared. The orcs who lived in this borderland settlement existed on sufferance, refugees from clan wars to the north, who had been granted permission to farm these rocky fields only because no humans wanted them. They paid higher taxes than human settlements, endured regular inspections by royal guards, and lived under the constant threat of expulsion. To refuse a royal decree was to invite destruction upon everyone they loved. 3 weeks later, Kendra found herself walking the long road south toward the capital alongside her mother and brother. Other orc families traveled with them, a ragged procession of green-skinned farmers wearing their best clothes, which were still shabby compared to the finery they glimpsed when they finally reached the city. Human merchants and nobles stared at them with expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust. Children pointed and whispered. More than once, Kendra heard someone mutter monsters or savages as they passed. The royal castle dominated the skyline, its white towers reaching toward the clouds like accusing fingers. Kendra had never seen anything so grand or so cold. They were herded with the other orcs into a separate entrance, made to wait in a courtyard while human citizens filed through the main gates. Guards watched them constantly, as though expecting violence at any moment. When they were finally allowed inside, Kendra's breath caught despite herself. The great hall stretched impossibly vast, its vaulted ceiling painted with scenes of human heroes defeating monstrous enemies. She noticed several panels depicted orcs being driven back by shining knights, their tusked faces twisted into masks of mindless aggression. Her jaw tightened. The human nobility occupied the front of the hall, dressed in silk and velvet, jewels glittering at their throats and fingers. The orcs were directed to the very back, standing in shadows while humans claimed the cushioned seats. Kendra's brother, Jorn, shifted uncomfortably beside her. He was only 15, still gangly with youth, and she could feel his nervousness like a physical presence. "It will be all right," she whispered to him, though she did not believe it herself. Trumpets sounded, clear and bright, and the assembly fell silent. The king entered through a side door, and Kendra finally laid eyes on the man whose decree had dragged them hundreds of miles from their homes. Adrian Hawthorne was younger than she had expected, perhaps 25 years at most. He stood tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell in waves to his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore ceremonial armor polished to a mirror shine, a crown of silver resting on his brow. Behind him walked a young woman in a wedding gown so elaborate that Kendra could not imagine how she moved beneath its weight. The princess-to-be had pale blonde hair and a smile that looked painted on her face. The ceremony began with all the pompous ritual Kendra had anticipated. Priests droned on about divine right and sacred duty. The king and his bride exchanged vows written in language so flowery that it seemed meaningless. Kendra found her attention drifting, wondering how many days it would take to walk home, whether the late planting would still yield a harvest. Then the herald stepped forward again, and his voice rang through the hall. All subjects of the realm shall now come forward and pledge their loyalty to King Adrian Hawthorne and Queen Eleanor Hawthorne. Approach in order and kneel before your sovereigns. The human nobles went first, processing down the center aisle in order of rank. Each one knelt elegantly, murmured their oath, and rose to return to their place. The ritual seemed endless. Kendra's feet began to ache from standing, but she dared not shift position lest she draw attention. Finally, the herald gestured toward the back of the hall. The orc subjects will now come forward. Kendra's heart hammered against her ribs. She watched as the first orc family approached, an older couple who farmed the eastern borderlands. They knelt awkwardly, their joints creaking, their faces carefully blank. The king barely glanced at them as they mumbled their oath. More orcs followed. Each one knelt. Each one bent their neck and lowered their eyes and submitted to this display of dominance disguised as ceremony. Kendra's mother touched her arm. "Our turn," she whispered. They walked down the aisle together, Kendra, her mother, and Jorn. The distance seemed to stretch forever, every eye in the hall tracking their movement. Kendra could feel the weight of human judgment pressing down on her shoulders. She kept her chin up, her tusked jaw set, her pointed ears pricked forward rather than flattened in submission. They reached the dais where the king sat on his throne, his new queen beside him. Up close, Kendra could see that his eyes were not cold as she had imagined, but watchful, intelligent. He studied each person who approached with an intensity that surprised her. Her mother knelt. Jorn followed suit quickly, his young face uncertain. Kendra remained standing. The silence that fell over the hall was absolute. She had not planned this, had not consciously decided to defy the decree. But something in her refused to bend, refused to treat this display of power as though it were right or natural. She was not a subject who had chosen this king. She was a refugee allowed to exist on the margins of his realm, but she would not pretend that kneeling made her grateful for the privilege of survival. She met the king's eyes directly, her hands loose at her sides, her posture neither aggressive nor submissive. Just standing, simply being. Her mother made a small sound of distress. Guards took a step forward from their positions along the walls. The queen's carefully painted smile faltered into confusion, but the king raised a hand, halting the guard's advance. He leaned forward slightly on his throne, and for a long moment, he simply looked at Kendra. She could not read the expression in his gray eyes, could not tell if she was about to be dragged from the hall or executed on the spot. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth lifted in something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "Kendra Lawrenson," she replied, proud that her voice did not shake. "And why do you refuse to kneel, Kendra Lawrenson?" She could have lied, could have claimed illness or injury, could have made some excuse that would let him save face and let her escape punishment. Instead, she spoke the truth that burned in her chest. "Because I do not kneel for those who see me as a monster, Your Majesty." I will not bow and pretend that ceremony makes me valued when your laws make me less than human. If you wish to exile me or imprison me for honesty, then do so, but I will not kneel." The gasps that rippled through the crowd were audible. Her mother's quiet sob cut through Kendra's heart, but she did not look away from the king's face. Adrian Hawthorne stood slowly, descending the steps of the dais with measured grace. He moved toward Kendra, and she braced herself for violence, for rage, for the consequences of her defiance. Instead, he stopped a few feet away and inclined his head toward her in a gesture that looked almost like respect. "You are the first person today to speak truth in this hall," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone, though in the utter silence everyone strained to hear. "The first person to stand before me as though I were simply a man rather than a symbol to fear or flatter." He turned to address the crowd, his voice rising. "This orc woman shows more courage than a hall full of nobles who kneel because they are commanded to. She reminds me that loyalty cannot be demanded, only earned." He looked back at Kendra. "You may stand or kneel as your conscience dictates, Kendra Lawrenson. I will not punish honesty, though it challenges me." Then he did something that shocked Kendra to her core. He knelt before her, one knee on the stone floor, and looked up into her face. "I pledge to you that I will work to change the laws that treat your people as lesser," he said, his voice clear and formal as though making a sacred vow. "I cannot undo centuries of prejudice in a day, but I can begin. Will you give me the chance to prove that I am not the king you believe me to be?" Kendra's mind reeled. This was not how kings behaved. This was not how the world worked. But Adrian Hawthorne knelt before her in his ceremonial armor with his crown gleaming and his gray eyes serious. And she realized that he meant every word. Slowly, more from shock than calculation, she extended her green hand toward him. He took it without hesitation, his human fingers warm against her cooler skin, and rose to his feet. "I will watch your actions, Your Majesty," she said, "and hope that your words prove true." He squeezed her hand once before releasing it, then turned back to the crowd. "Let it be known that any citizen, human or orc, who speaks truth to power in my kingdom will be heard, not punished. This I decree on my wedding day, that it may be remembered." The hall erupted in whispered conversation, but Kendra barely heard it. Her mother was crying openly now, tears of relief streaming down her weathered face. Jorn stared at his sister with something approaching awe. And Kendra herself felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet, as though the world had tilted into some new configuration she did not yet understand. The ceremony concluded in a blur. Kendra and her family were escorted to guest quarters within the castle itself, a courtesy extended to no other orc family. A servant brought them food and assured them they were free to leave whenever they wished, but the king requested the honor of Kendra's presence at the wedding feast that evening. "You do not have to go," her mother said, once they were alone in the surprisingly comfortable room. "We can leave tonight, go home before." "Before what?" Kendra asked. "Before he changes his mind. Before someone convinces him that showing respect to an orc woman undermines his authority. Before you lose your heart," her mother said softly. "I saw the way he looked at you, daughter. And I saw the way you looked at him, though you may not admit it even to yourself." "He is newly married," Kendra protested, "and a human, and a king. There was no world in which a king would kneel before an orc," her mother interrupted gently. "Yet today one did." "I am only asking you to guard your heart, Kendra. Hope is a dangerous thing for our people." But Kendra found herself preparing for the feast with more care than she had given to the ceremony. She braided her black hair in the traditional style of her mother's clan, wove small flowers from the castle garden into the plates. She wore her best tunic, dark green wool embroidered with silver thread by her own careful hand. She was no human noble in silk and jewels, but she would present herself with dignity. The feast took place in a different hall, this one with long tables laden with more food than Kendra had seen in her entire life. Musicians played in the gallery above, their instruments creating melodies that tugged at something deep in her chest. She was seated at a side table with other guests of lesser rank, but she noticed that it was not the table where the other orc families had been placed. They sat near the kitchens, while she sat close enough to the high table to see the king clearly. Adrian Hawthorne sat beside his new queen, smiling and nodding as nobles approached to offer congratulations. But Kendra noticed that his smiles never reached his eyes, that his attention kept drifting away from his bride's attempts at conversation. Twice, she caught him looking in her direction, and each time her pulse quickened treacherously. Halfway through the feast, he rose from his seat and moved through the hall, stopping at various tables to speak with his guests. Kendra watched his progression with growing nervousness, suspecting where it would lead. When he reached her table, conversations died as though cut with a knife. The human merchants who shared her table shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain how to behave. "Kendra Lawrenson," the king said, and she stood to face him. "Would you walk with me? There is a garden where we might speak more privately." It was phrased as a question, but they both knew it was a command. She nodded, acutely aware of every eye following them as they left the hall. The garden was beautiful in the evening light, roses blooming in ordered profusion along gravel paths. A fountain splashed softly at the center, its stone carved with intertwining vines. Adrian led her to a bench partially hidden by climbing jasmine and gestured for her to sit. "You must think me a fool," he said without preamble, taking a seat beside her but careful to leave distance between them. "Or mad, perhaps, walking away from my own wedding feast to speak with a woman who defied me." "I think you are unlike any king I imagined," Kendra said honestly, "but I do not understand your intentions, Your Majesty." "Adrian," he said, "please, I am weary of titles and formality." "You just married," Kendra pointed out. "Should you not be with your queen?" His jaw tightened. I should be celebrating a marriage that was arranged when I was 10 years old, and she was 8. Neither of us consulted. Neither of us considered beyond our bloodlines and our usefulness to the realm. I should be pretending that I am happy, that this is what I wanted, that duty is enough to build a life upon." The bitterness in his voice shocked her. "Then why? Because I am king," he said simply. "And kings do not choose their own paths. We inherit thrones and responsibilities and expectations that weigh more than crowns. We marry for alliances and produce heirs to continue the line. We do what is necessary, not what we desire." Kendra studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the weariness around his eyes that she had not noticed in the crowded hall. "You speak as though you are in a prison." "A gilded one," he agreed. "But yes." "And then today, in that hall full of people who kneel because they must or because they want something from me, you stood. You looked at me as though I were simply a man, not a symbol. You challenged me with honesty instead of flattery, and for one moment I felt like I could breathe." "So this is about rebellion?" Kendra asked, uncertain whether to be flattered or offended. "You seek me out because I represent defiance?" "No." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "I seek you out because when you stood before me, unafraid and honest and proud, I saw someone I wanted to know, someone real in a world of performance and pretense." "You do not know me," Kendra said, but her voice came out softer than she intended. "You know only a moment of defiance." That does not make me special or real or anything beyond what I am, an orc woman who farms rocky soil and scrapes by on the edges of your kingdom. Then let me know you, he said. Stay. Not in the castle. I know that would be impossible, but in the city. I can offer you employment, a position in the royal household. As what? Kendra interrupted. A curiosity. A pet savage to prove how progressive you are. He flinched as though she had struck him. I deserved that. I am making a mess of this. I am not. He ran a hand through his dark hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. I have never done this before. Wanted to know someone. Chosen to pursue. Friendship or whatever this might become. Everything in my life has been arranged and predetermined. I do not know how to simply ask someone to give me a chance without it sounding like a command or a transaction. Despite herself, despite every reason she had to distrust him, Kendra felt something in her chest soften. You are asking for friendship with an orc woman while your human bride sits in your feast hall. Do you not see how this appears? I see that I am married to a woman I barely know and do not love, and that I will honor the vows I spoke today even as they strangle me, Adrian said quietly. I see that I am asking something unfair of you, but I also see that I have lived 25 years without once meeting someone who made me want to be better, to do better, to change the world rather than simply maintaining it. And I cannot let you walk away without trying. Kendra closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the impossible pressing down on her. You are asking me to stay near you, to be your friend, while you are married to another woman. You are asking me to exist in a world that hates me, to live in a city where humans see me as a monster. You are asking me to hope that you will keep your promises about changing laws while I watch you play the perfect king with your perfect queen. Do you understand what you are asking? Yes, he said simply. And I know it is unfair and selfish and perhaps impossible, but I am asking anyway. She opened her eyes and looked at him, this human king with his storm-gray eyes and his gilded cage and his desperate honesty. She thought of her mother's warning about hope being dangerous. She thought of the long road home to the borderlands and the small life waiting there, safe and predictable and empty of anything like this strange, terrifying possibility. 3 months, she heard herself say. I will stay for 3 months. You will give me honest work, not charity. And at the end of that time, I will decide whether your promises are worth trusting. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise, bright and warm and entirely genuine. 3 months, he agreed. Thank you, he stood, offering her his hand to help her rise. She took it, feeling again that strange warmth where their skin touched. As they walked back toward the hall, neither of them noticed the figure watching from an upper window, pale hair gleaming in the lamplight, hands clenched on the stone sill. The next morning, Kendra said goodbye to her mother and brother. Jorn hugged her tightly, whispering that she was the bravest person he knew. Her mother held her for a long moment, then pulled back to cup Kendra's face in her weathered hands. Follow your heart, she said. But remember that hearts can be broken and some breaks do not heal. Be careful, my daughter. I will, Kendra promised, though she suspected it was already too late for careful. The position Adrian arranged for her was in the royal archives, cataloging and preserving old documents. The scholar who oversaw the archives, an elderly man named Master Fenwick, seemed surprised but not displeased to have an orc assistant. He set her to work carefully cleaning and sorting papers from the kingdom's early history, teaching her the proper techniques for handling fragile parchment. The work was meticulous and soothing, requiring focus that left little room for worry. Kendra found herself fascinated by the glimpses of history revealed in faded ink treaties and tax records, and personal letters that made the past feel suddenly real and human. Adrian visited the archives more frequently than Master Fenwick considered normal for a king, especially a newly married one. At first, the visits were brief and formal, Adrian asking after her work and discussing the documents she had found. But gradually, the conversations lengthened, deepened. He began to arrive in the evening after his court duties were complete, and they would talk while lamplight flickered across ancient pages. She learned that he had inherited the throne at 19 when his father died suddenly, thrust into power with little preparation. She learned that he loved books and history, that he had once dreamed of being a scholar rather than a king. She learned that his marriage to Alina was arranged to secure an alliance with the Western duchies, and that they spoke to each other with polite courtesy, but nothing resembling warmth or affection. In turn, Kendra told him about the orc settlements, about the clan wars that had driven her family south, about the difficulty of building a life on land that barely supported crops. She told him about the casual cruelties of human neighbors, the higher taxes and restrictions that kept orcs perpetually struggling. She did not soften the truth, and he did not flinch from hearing it. "I have been drafting a proposal," he told her one evening, unrolling a document covered in his neat handwriting. "Tax reform to equalize the burden between human and orc settlements, legal protections against discrimination in trade. A path to full citizenship for orcs who have lived peacefully in the kingdom for 5 years or more." Kendra read through the proposal carefully, her heart rising with each carefully crafted clause. "This is more than I expected, more than I thought possible." "It will face resistance," Adrian warned. "The nobles will argue that I am too soft, too progressive. They will say that orcs cannot be trusted with the rights of citizenship, but I have the power to push this through the council if I am willing to spend political capital on it." "Why?" Kendra asked, looking up from the parchment to meet his eyes. "Why risk your standing with the nobility for this?" "Because it is right," he said simply. "And because I promised you I would work to change things, and because—" He hesitated, then continued quietly, "because I want to build a kingdom that is worthy of you." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with everything they were not saying. Kendra set down the proposal with careful precision, her hands suddenly unsteady. "Adrian, we cannot, I know," he interrupted gently. "I am married. I have duties and responsibilities, but I can still want to be the man you believed I could be, even if I cannot be anything more to you than that." But they were already more than that, and both of them knew it. The friendship they had claimed to be building had deepened into something more dangerous, more consuming. Kendra found herself thinking of him at odd moments throughout the day, looking forward to his evening visits with an anticipation that felt both wonderful and terrible. She memorized the sound of his laugh, the way his eyes crinkled when he was truly amused, the gentleness of his hands when he helped her unroll a particularly fragile document. 2 months passed in this strange liminal space, balanced between friendship and something unnamed. Adrian presented his reforms to the council and pushed them through despite fierce opposition. The new laws were proclaimed throughout the kingdom, and Kendra received letters from her mother describing the relief and cautious hope in the orc settlements. But the queen grew colder. Kendra saw her sometimes in the castle corridors, and Alina's pale eyes would track her with undisguised hostility. Rumors began to circulate, whispers about the king's inappropriate attachment to the orc woman in the archives. Servants who had been friendly grew distant. Even Master Fenwick began to watch Kendra with concern. "You should be careful," he told her gently one afternoon. "The court is a dangerous place, and you have made a powerful enemy in the queen. She is young but not foolish, and she knows where her husband's attention strays." "I have done nothing wrong," Kendra protested. We have only talked, nothing more." "Intent matters less than appearance," Master Fenwick said sadly. "And the appearance is that the king prefers your company to his wife's. True or not, that is a dangerous perception." That evening, when Adrian arrived at the archives, Kendra was prepared to have a difficult conversation. But he entered with unusual energy, his eyes bright with excitement. "The orc delegation arrived today," he announced. "Leaders from the northern clans, coming to discuss the possibility of a formal peace treaty. This could change everything, Kendra. A real alliance instead of just tolerance. Trade agreements, cultural exchange, an end to the constant border tensions." "That is wonderful," Kendra said, and meant it, even as her heart sank. "You have accomplished so much." He caught the sadness in her voice immediately. "What is wrong?" "My 3 months are nearly ended," she said quietly. "And I think it is time for me to go home. The court talks, Adrian. People notice how often you come here, how much time we spend together. I am causing problems for you, creating difficulties with your queen. This cannot continue." His face went very still. "Do you want to leave?" "It does not matter what I want," Kendra said, though the words cost her. "You are married. You are a king. And I am an orc woman who has already pushed the boundaries of what is acceptable too far. I should return to my settlement before." "Before what?" "Before someone notices that I am in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and true. Kendra felt as though all the breath had been driven from her lungs. "Do not," she whispered. "Please do not say that." "Why?" He moved closer, his voice rough with emotion. "Because it makes it real. Because it is hopeless and wrong and impossible. I know all of that, Kendra. I have told myself every reason why I should not feel this way. You are an orc, I am human. I am married, you are. There is no path forward for us, but I love you anyway. I love your strength and your honesty and the way you see the world clearly rather than through the lens of prejudice and tradition. I love that you challenged me, that you made me want to be better. I love you, and I am sorry that my love is a burden you should not have to carry, but I cannot pretend any more." Kendra felt tears burning in her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. "I love you too," she said, the admission torn from somewhere deep inside her. "And that is why I have to leave. Because I cannot be near you and watch you smile at your queen and know that I am breaking every rule of honor by even caring. Because I cannot be the reason your marriage fails or your court turns against you. Because loving you feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, and I cannot keep my balance any longer." He reached for her hands, and she let him take them, let herself have this one moment of touching him the way she wanted to. His fingers threaded through hers, warm and solid and right in a way that made her ache. "What if there were a way?" he asked desperately. "What if—" "There is not," she said firmly, pulling her hands free though it felt like tearing something vital. "You are married, Adrian. You spoke vows before your people and your gods. I will not be the reason you break them. I will not become the woman who ruins a king because he was kind to her." "My marriage is a political arrangement," he protested. "Elinor does not love me any more than I love her. We are courteous strangers sharing a crown. Surely there could be no." Kendra stepped back, putting physical distance between them because it was the only way she could think clearly. "Listen to yourself. You are talking about dishonoring your vows, about creating a scandal that would undermine everything you have worked to build. The reforms you passed, the treaty you are negotiating, all of it would be tainted if you were seen as a king who betrayed his marriage for an orc woman. They would say I bewitched you, that orcs cannot be trusted, that every prejudice they ever held was justified. Is that what you want? To destroy the progress you have made?" The anguish on his face nearly broke her resolve. "I want you," he said simply. "I want a life where I can choose love instead of duty, Is that so wrong? Not wrong, Kendra said softly. Just impossible. And I care about you too much to let you destroy yourself for me. So I am going to leave, and you are going to let me go. And we are both going to carry this and survive it because we are strong enough to do what is right even when it hurts. She gathered her few belongings with trembling hands, the personal items she had brought to the archives over the past months. Adrian watched her in silence, his expression shattered. At the door, she paused and looked back at him one last time. "Be a good king," she said. "Keep your promises to my people. Build the kingdom you dreamed of, and find a way to be happy, even if it is not the happiness you wanted." Then she left before he could respond, before she could change her mind, before her courage failed her entirely. She made it halfway across the castle courtyard before the tears came, silent and hot down her green cheeks. She had told her mother that hope was not dangerous, but she had been wrong. Hope had taken root in her heart, and now the tearing free felt like dying. She returned to her temporary lodgings in the city and prepared to leave at first light. But sleep would not come. She lay in the darkness, replaying every conversation, every moment, every time his hand had brushed hers while reaching for the same document. She had known, even in those early days, that she was walking toward heartbreak. But she had gone anyway, unable to resist the pull of him. The knock at her door came well past midnight. Kendra opened it to find not Adrian but Queen Eleanor standing in the corridor, wrapped in a dark cloak, her pale face drawn. "May I come in?" the Queen asked, her voice quiet but firm. Shocked, Kendra stepped aside to let her enter. Eleanor moved into the small room and turned to face her, and Kendra saw that the Queen had been crying. "I came to thank you," Eleanor said, the words clearly difficult. "Thank me for leaving, for refusing to destroy my marriage even though—" Eleanor's voice faltered. "Even though it is not a real marriage, not truly. But it is all I have. My father sold me to secure an alliance when I was a child. I did not choose Adrian any more than he chose me. But I am queen now, and that position is my power and my protection. If the king were to set me aside for an orc woman, I would have nothing. My father would see it as a humiliation, my value in his eyes destroyed. I would be sent back to his house in disgrace, a failure, a discarded thing." Kendra felt a wave of compassion for this pale, unhappy young woman. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I never intended, I know," Eleanor interrupted. "That is why I am thanking you. You could have stayed. You could have let him make promises he would regret, choices that would have damaged him and destroyed me. But you chose to leave instead to protect him from himself. That is—" She paused, gathering her composure. "That is more kindness than I expected from a rival." "I am not your rival," Kendra said. "I am a woman who loves a man she cannot have. There is no competition when there is no possible victory." Eleanor nodded slowly. "He does love you, you know. I have seen the way he looks when he speaks of you, the way he comes alive in your presence in a way he never has with me, and I—" She drew a shaky breath. "I wish I could hate you for it. It would be easier. But all I feel is envy that you can have his love even if you cannot have him while I have him and none of his love at all." "Perhaps someday," Kendra began, but Eleanor shook her head. "No. We are both too wounded by this arrangement, too resentful of the chains we wear. At best, we will learn to be friendly, but I do not think either of us will ever know what it feels like to be loved by the person we are bound to." She moved toward the door, then paused. "I hope you find happiness, Kendra Lawrenson. You deserve it more than I do." After the Queen left, Kendra sat in the darkness and felt the full weight of impossibility settle over her. Eleanor was right. There was no path forward, no way to reconcile the love she felt with the reality of Adrian's position. Leaving was the only choice, however much it hurt. But when dawn came, The city erupted in chaos. Kendra heard the shouting first, the sound of running feet and alarmed voices. She rushed to her window and saw soldiers mobilizing in the streets below, citizens pointing toward the northern gate. Smoke rose in the distance, dark against the morning sky. She hurried into the street, stopping a passing merchant. "What is happening?" "The northern clans," he panted. The orc delegation, it was an infiltration. They attacked during the night, killed guards, tried to breach the treasury. The king's soldiers stopped them, but now there's a battle at the northern gate. More orcs are coming from outside the city. Kendra's blood ran cold. What? That cannot be right. The clans would not, but the merchant was already running, and around her she heard the angry murmurs beginning. Knew we could not trust them. Savages, all of them. Should never have let orcs in the city walls. She ran toward the castle, her heart pounding. This made no sense. The northern clans had everything to gain from peace, nothing to gain from an attack that would be easily repelled. Unless someone wanted to sabotage the peace treaty. Someone who benefited from continued conflict between humans and orcs. The castle gates were barred when she arrived, guards everywhere, weapons drawn. They would not let her pass at first, but she shouted Adrian's name until finally a captain she recognized from her time in the archives agreed to carry a message. Adrian emerged minutes later, his armor dusty from battle, a cut above his eyebrow slowly bleeding. When he saw her, relief washed over his face so clearly that even the guards noticed. "You are safe," he breathed. "Thank the gods." "When I heard about the attack, I thought they might target you as well, being from the northern regions." "This was not the clans," Kendra said urgently. "Adrian, think about it. Why would they send a delegation to discuss peace and then immediately attack? It makes no strategic sense." "The evidence is clear," one of the nobles standing nearby said coldly. Lord Cashin, she remembered, one of the men who had argued most fiercely against Adrian's reforms. "We found maps of the castle in their possession, plans to assassinate the king and destabilize the realm. Your people showed their true nature, orc. Monsters cannot be trusted to act civilized." "My people would not," Kendra began, but Adrian held up a hand. "Let her speak," he commanded. "The maps, the plans, could they have been planted?" Kendra asked. "Who discovered them?" "Who first raised the alarm about the attack?" "I did," Lord Cashin said smoothly. "I was walking the battlements when I noticed suspicious movement near the North Tower. When I investigated, I found the orcs attempting to force the treasury door." "How convenient," Kendra said, her mind racing. "That you happened to be walking the battlements at night. That you happened to discover the plot. That the orcs who came seeking peace happened to carry evidence of their treachery in writing. Are you accusing me of conspiracy?" Lord Cashin's voice went dangerously quiet. "I am saying that someone benefits greatly from this attack," Kendra replied, meeting his eyes steadily. "Someone who opposed the treaty, who argued against the king's reforms, who has everything to lose if humans and orcs make peace." Adrian had gone very still, his gaze sharpening. "Where are the orc delegates now?" "Dead, Your Majesty," another soldier reported. "They fought to the last rather than surrender." "How convenient," Adrian echoed Kendra's words, "that they cannot be questioned, that we have only Lord Cashin's word about what transpired. You dare doubt me." Cashin blustered, but Kendra could see fear creeping into his eyes now. "Search his quarters," Adrian commanded, "and question the guards who supposedly died at the North Tower. I want to know exactly what happened and who knew about it beforehand." The investigation that followed moved quickly once Adrian gave it his full attention. The guards who had died were found bound and gagged but alive in a storage cellar, able to testify that they had been overpowered by human attackers, not orcs. A search of Lord Cashin's rooms turned up a cache of gold that matched none of his known holdings, along with correspondence from other nobles who opposed the treaty. The truth unraveled like a pulled thread. Cashin and his co-conspirators had hired mercenaries to attack the castle dressed as orcs, then murdered the real delegates and planted evidence to frame them. The entire plot had been designed to destroy the peace process and justify harsher treatment of orc populations. It had nearly worked. Lord Cashin and 3 other nobles were arrested for treason. Adrian sent riders to the northern clans immediately with the truth and renewed offers of peace. And he announced that Kendra Lawrenson's quick thinking and insight had prevented a grievous injustice, that she had saved the treaty and probably prevented a war. The city that had whispered about the king's inappropriate attachment to an orc woman suddenly saw her as a hero. The irony was not lost on Kendra in the aftermath. As order was gradually restored, Adrian found her in the archives where she had retreated to process everything that had happened. The room was empty except for them, the late afternoon sun slanting through high windows. "You saved everything I was trying to build," he said quietly. "If the treaty had been destroyed, if the clans had been falsely blamed, we would have lost years of progress." "I only asked questions," Kendra replied. "You are the one who pursued the truth." "We make a good team," he said, and the weight of meaning in those words hung between them. Kendra looked at him, this man she loved and could not have, and felt the ache of it threaten to overwhelm her. "I am still leaving," she said gently. "This changes nothing about us, Adrian." "What if it could?" he asked. "What if there were another way?" "There is not." Eleanor came to see me, he interrupted. "After she visited you last night, we talked, really talked for the first time since our wedding. She does not love me, Kendra. She does not want this marriage any more than I do. We are both prisoners of an arrangement we did not choose." "That does not mean you can simply set her aside," Kendra protested. "The scandal, what if she could choose to leave?" Adrian asked. "What if I gave her the option, the resources, the power to make her own life? Her father has other daughters to make alliances through. She could return to her homeland with wealth and independence, free to pursue her own happiness. She told me last night that she has never wanted to be queen, that she would give anything to be free of the crown and the expectations." Kendra's heart began to beat faster, hope and terror warring in her chest. You cannot annul a royal marriage simply because both parties are unhappy. "No," Adrian agreed. "But I can propose a separation, a mutual agreement that the marriage was a mistake. It would be unprecedented and the council would fight me on it. But I am the king. If I am willing to spend all of my political capital, to push through every objection, to weather the scandal and the criticism, I could do it. The question is—" He stepped closer, his gray eyes searching her face. "Would you want me to? Would you be willing to face the prejudice and the gossip and the challenges of being with a king who chose an orc woman over a human queen? Because I will not do this unless you will be with me at the end of it. I will not destroy my marriage and Eleanor's position unless I am building something real in their place." Kendra felt dizzy with the enormity of what he was offering. "The court would hate me. Many humans would see it as a betrayal, an insult. Your nobles would argue that you are unfit to rule if you make such an emotional choice." "Yes," he agreed. "All of that and more. But I am learning slowly that being king means using my power for what I believe is right, even when it is difficult. I believe that being with you is right. I believe that building a life with someone I love and respect and trust is worth the cost. But I need to know if you believe it too." She thought of her mother's warning about hope being dangerous. She thought of the long months of aching for something impossible. She thought of the life she could have simple, safe, predictable back in the borderland settlements. And she thought of Adrian's face when he looked at her, the way he had knelt before her that first day, the promises he had kept, and the reforms he had pushed through despite opposition. "I believe it," she whispered. "I believe in you and in us, and in the possibility that we can build something good even if it is difficult." The smile that broke across his face was brilliant, and then he was stepping forward, his hands coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. He hesitated one moment, giving her time to pull away, and then he was kissing her. The kiss was soft and careful and full of all the feeling they had been holding back for months. Kendra felt tears slip down her cheeks as she kissed him back, her hands fisting in his tunic, holding on to this impossible, wonderful moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you that I will do this right," he said quietly. "Eleanor will be protected and provided for. The separation will be as amicable as such things can be. And I will work every day to be worthy of your trust." "You already are," Kendra said. "You already are." The process that followed was neither quick nor easy. Adrian approached the council with his intention to separate from Eleanor, and the nobles erupted in protest and outrage. But he stood firm, and Eleanor stood with him, publicly stating that the marriage had been a mistake and that she wished to return to her homeland with the king's blessing and support. Her dignity and composure in the face of the scandal won her more sympathy than Adrian had expected. The separation was negotiated over long weeks, lawyers and diplomats wrangling over details. Eleanor was granted a substantial estate and income, enough to support herself and her household independently. Her father, pragmatic as always, accepted the situation when he realized that his daughter would be wealthier and more autonomous than she had been as queen. Throughout it all, Kendra remained in the city, returning to her work in the archives. She and Adrian were circumspect in public, aware that any appearance of impropriety would undermine the separation. But in the evenings, in the quiet spaces where they could be alone, they talked and planned and dreamed of the future they were building. The northern clans, hearing of the king's commitment to the orc woman who had saved the treaty, sent a delegation of elders to meet with Adrian and Kendra. They negotiated the peace treaty in good faith, impressed by a king who was willing to defy convention for love and justice. The treaty that emerged was stronger than anyone had hoped, establishing trade routes and cultural exchange and formal alliance against common enemies. 6 months after the wedding where Kendra had refused to kneel, she stood in a much smaller ceremony in the castle gardens. Adrian wore simple clothes rather than royal regalia, and Kendra wore a dress the color of spring leaves, embroidered with silver thread. Her mother and brother sat in the front row, crying openly. Master Fenwick attended, beaming with pride. Even Eleanor came, dressed elegantly, smiling with what looked like genuine happiness for them. The priest who performed the ceremony spoke of love that bridges differences, of courage that defies expectations, of choices that change the world. And when Adrian and Kendra spoke their vows to each other, there was no mention of kneeling or oaths of fealty. They promised partnership and respect and love, two people choosing each other freely. "I promise to stand beside you," Adrian said, his voice steady and sure as he held her hands. "Not above you or below you, but beside you. I promise to listen when you challenge me, to fight for justice even when it is difficult, to build a kingdom that is worthy of your courage." "I promise to stand with you," Kendra replied, her heart full to bursting. "To face whatever challenges come with honesty and strength. To help you be the king you want to be, and the man you already are. To build a life together that honors both of our peoples and bridges the divide between them." When the priest pronounced them married, Adrian pulled Kendra close and kissed her as the small gathering cheered. She felt the warmth of the sun on her face, the strength of his arms around her, the joy of her family witnessing this impossible, wonderful moment. They held a public celebration in the city the following week, making clear to the kingdom that this was not a scandal to be hidden, but a choice to be honored. Some humans grumbled and complained, but many more came to celebrate, curious about this unprecedented union. Orcs traveled from the northern settlements to witness one of their own being honored, rather than tolerated. Children, both human and orc, stared wide-eyed at the green-skinned woman who was now their queen. Because Adrian had insisted on that, when the council tried to argue that Kendra should have a lesser title. "She is my wife," he had said firmly. "That makes her queen, regardless of her species. We will not create different standards based on blood." Kendra had struggled with the title at first, feeling unworthy of the weight it carried. But Adrian reminded her that she had already shown more courage and wisdom than most royalty ever did. "You stood when others would kneel," he told her. "You spoke truth when others offered flattery. You saw through a conspiracy when trained soldiers did not. You are already everything a queen should be. The title just makes it official." They established their household with care, appointing both humans and orcs to positions of responsibility. Kendra's brother Jorn was given a place in the royal guards, and he took to the training with enthusiasm and dedication. Her mother was offered rooms in the castle, but chose to remain in the borderlands, saying that she was too old to change her ways but would visit often. The treaty with the northern clans flourished. Trade routes opened, bringing orc crafts and goods to human markets and human innovations to orc settlements. Cultural exchanges saw young orcs learning human languages and traditions, while human scholars traveled north to study orc history and customs. The prejudice did not disappear overnight, but slowly, gradually, the two peoples learned to see each other as something other than enemies. Adrian continued to push for reforms, always consulting with Kendra about the needs of orc communities. Together they established schools that welcomed both human and orc children, teaching them to read and write in both languages. They created trade guilds that protected orc merchants from discrimination. They appointed orcs to positions in the government, giving them voices in the decisions that affected their lives. Not everyone approved. There were protests and complaints, and a few minor rebellions from nobles who felt the king had gone too far. But Adrian faced each challenge with the same steady determination, and Kendra stood beside him, her presence a constant reminder of why the changes mattered. 2 years after their wedding, Kendra gave birth to a daughter. The baby had her mother's green skin and pointed ears, but her father's gray eyes. They named her Arya, meaning brave song, because she came into the world howling with impressive volume and showed no inclination to quiet down. Adrian held his daughter with a wonder that made Kendra's heart ache with love. "She will grow up in a different world than either of us did," he said softly, tracing the tiny point of her ear with one gentle finger. "A world where a child can be both human and orc, where she will not have to choose or hide part of herself." "A world you are building for her," Kendra said, leaning against his shoulder to gaze down at their daughter. "One reform, one treaty, one choice at a time." The years that followed were not without challenges. There were diplomatic crises and economic difficulties, and the constant work of governance that never truly ended. But they faced it together, Adrian and Kendra, the human king and the orc queen who had refused to kneel. On quiet evenings, when the day's work was done and Arya was asleep in her nursery, they would walk in the gardens where Adrian had first asked Kendra to stay. The jasmine still climbed the walls, its scent sweet in the night air. The fountain still splashed softly, its sound soothing. "Do you ever regret it?" Kendra asked him one such evening, her hand in his as they walked the familiar paths. "The scandal, the struggle, the constant battles with the council." "Never," Adrian said without hesitation. "Every difficulty was worth it to be with you, to build this life together, to raise our daughter in a kingdom that is better than the one I inherited." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his gray eyes serious in the lamplight. "You made me want to be more than I was. You challenged me to use my power for good rather than just maintaining tradition. You showed me that love and justice are worth fighting for, even when the cost is high." "We showed each other," Kendra corrected gently. "I would still be farming rocky soil in the borderlands if you had not seen me as a person rather than a monster, if you had not kept your promises, if you had not loved me enough to defy your entire world." He smiled and pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "Then we are fortunate that I was smart enough to recognize a gift when it stood before me and refused to kneel." She laughed against his chest, remembering that day in the great hall that felt both like yesterday and like a lifetime ago. The frightened, angry young woman she had been then would hardly recognize the queen she had become. But at her core, she was still the same person who had stood her ground and spoken truth, who had refused to bend even when it would have been easier. And Adrian was still the king who had loved her for it, who had seen strength instead of defiance, courage instead of disrespect, who had chosen to build a kingdom that honored truth over tradition, love over duty, justice over prejudice. Their daughter grew strong and bright, a child of two worlds who belonged fully to both. She played with human and orc children without distinction, learned both languages as naturally as breathing, grew up surrounded by the evidence that different peoples could choose peace and partnership over conflict. When Arya was 5 years old, she asked her father why some of the nobles looked at her mother strangely. Adrian knelt down to his daughter's level, his expression serious. "Because your mother is brave," he said. "Because she stood up for what was right even when people told her to bow down. Because she showed me and everyone else that strength comes in many forms and that love is stronger than prejudice. Some people are uncomfortable with that kind of courage because it challenges them to be better. But you should be proud of your mother. I am. I am proud," Arya said solemnly. Then she grinned, showing the small tusks that were just beginning to emerge. "And when I grow up, I am going to be brave like Mama and stand up for what is right too." Kendra, listening from the doorway, felt her eyes fill with tears. This was what they had fought for, struggled for, defied kingdoms for not just their own happiness, but a world where their daughter could grow up whole and proud and unashamed of any part of herself. The story of the king who married the orc woman became legend in the kingdom, told and retold until it took on the weight of myth. But those who lived through it knew the truth was simpler and more profound than legend. It was the story of two people who chose each other, who chose justice, who chose to build something better than what they had inherited. And it was the story of a moment in a crowded hall when a proud orc woman refused to kneel, and a human king saw not defiance but dignity, not rebellion but truth, and loved her for the courage it took to stand. Years later, when Adrian and Kendra were older and their daughter was grown with children of her own, they would sit in those same gardens and remember. They would talk about the difficulties and the triumphs, the challenges they had faced and overcome together. And they would hold hands as the evening light faded, grateful for the choice they had made, the life they had built, the love that had transformed not just themselves but an entire kingdom. "Would you do it again?" Adrian would ask, though he already knew the answer. "Every time," Kendra would reply. "In every life, in every choice, I would stand before you and refuse to kneel and trust that you would see me truly. And I would kneel before you, Adrian would say, and promise to build a world worthy of your courage. They kept those promises, day after day, year after year, until standing and kneeling became meaningless distinctions, and all that remained was two people who had chosen each other and changed the world because of it. That was their story, the king and the orc woman who stood a tale of courage and love, and the revolutionary act of seeing someone truly, of honoring their strength instead of demanding their submission. And in the kingdom they built together, in the laws they changed and the prejudices they challenged, and the daughter they raised to be proud of all she was. That story lived on long after they were gone, a testament to the power of standing firm in truth and the transformative nature of love that refuses to be bound by convention or fear.